Have you ever wondered what would happen if you took an American paycheck and gave it to someone who was determined to save as much of it as possible? Not 5%, not 10%. I'm talking about saving a third of everything that comes through the door. Because right now, Americans are doing almost the exact opposite. In June 2026, the U.S. personal saving rate fell to just 2.7%. That means Americans were saving roughly 3 cents out of every dollar of disposable income. And here's where this gets interesting. China is operating on a completely different scale. The World Bank estimates that Chinese households saved about 31.3% of disposable income in 2023. And an IMF study using prefecture-level household data found an average saving rate of 35.2% among urban households in its sample. 35%. So imagine you make $5,000 a month. The American instinct is, how much can I spend? But someone saving 35% is thinking, how much can I keep? That's the difference we're going to investigate. Because if you think Chinese households are simply cheap, you're about to discover something much more uncomfortable. Their saving behavior isn't just about discipline. It's about fear, family, housing, retirement, social pressure, and one very different psychological relationship to tomorrow. And once you understand that, you might start looking at your own paycheck completely differently. The paycheck that disappears. Imagine two people receive exactly the same paycheck, $5,000. Same salary, same city, same 24 hours in the day. And let's say both of them are perfectly normal people. They want good food, they want vacations, they want a nice phone, they want a comfortable home. Neither one is trying to live like a monk. But the first person gets paid and thinks, what can I afford this month? The second person gets paid and thinks, what has to be protected before I start spending? That sounds like a tiny difference. It isn't. Suppose the first person saves just 3%. That's $150 a month. The second saves 35%. That's $1,750. That's a $1,600 difference every single month. $19,200 a year. And here's where the numbers become ridiculous. If you invested $150 a month for 30 years at an illustrative 8% annual return, compounded monthly, you'd end up with roughly $224,000. Now take that same person and increase the monthly investment to $1,750. Same market, same 30 years, same 8%. The ending value becomes roughly $2.6 million. Same paycheck. One different decision, completely different future. Now, obviously, nobody should look at China's 35% urban household figure and assume they can simply copy it overnight. That's not the point. The point is that the percentage of your income you allow yourself to keep can matter enormously more than people realize. And that brings us to the question that actually matters. Why are Chinese households saving so much in the first place? It's not because they hate spending. Here's where the popular explanation falls apart. You might imagine that Chinese families simply don't like spending money, but look at China today. Chinese consumers spend money. They travel, they eat at restaurants, they buy smartphones, they buy cars. In 2025, China's total retail sales of consumer goods reached 50.12 trillion yuan. So this isn't a country where nobody spends anything. Something else is happening. Chinese households can spend money and still maintain an enormous preference for financial security. And that preference has a history. For decades, Chinese households have faced something Americans often underestimate. The future isn't guaranteed. Think about what happens when an American loses a job, gets sick, or reaches retirement. There are insurance systems and government programs that can provide some protection. They don't make financial problems disappear, but they can reduce how much an individual household has to protect entirely by itself. China has social programs too, of course, but the level of protection and access to benefits varies significantly across different groups, particularly for some migrant and rural households. And researchers have repeatedly found that this matters. The IMF's research points to social protection gaps, limited access to some benefits, demographic pressures, and housing conditions as important factors behind China's unusually high household saving behavior. Think about what that does to your brain. If you believe someone will catch you when you fall, you can afford to walk closer to the edge. But if you believe nobody is coming, you build a much bigger safety net underneath yourself. And that's exactly what saving can become. Not wealth, not greed, insurance. The emergency fund becomes a way of life. Imagine you're a parent. You have one child, you have a mortgage, your parents are getting older, and then you ask yourself 3 questions. What happens if I lose my job? What happens if my child needs expensive education? What happens if my parents need medical care? What happens when I retire? Suddenly, that $20,000 sitting in your bank account doesn't look useless. It looks like protection. And that's one of the biggest differences between saving because you want to be rich and saving because you don't trust the future. The second one is much harder to break. You can tell someone, go enjoy yourself, but if their brain is thinking, what if something goes wrong, they're going to keep saving. This is one reason economists have spent years studying China's unusually high household saving rate. The research doesn't describe it as some magical cultural superpower. It points towards structural reasons, social protection, demographics, housing conditions, income differences, and uncertainty that push households towards precautionary saving. And that changes the story completely, because the Chinese saver isn't necessarily saying, I love money. They're often saying, I don't want to be helpless. That's a very different emotion.
Then housing changed everything. Now let's talk about something that has shaped Chinese household finances for decades: housing. For many Chinese families, property isn't simply a place to live. It became connected to wealth, family security, marriage, status, and the future. That created an enormous incentive to accumulate money. But here's the twist. The same housing market that once encouraged households to build wealth has also become one of the reasons people are more cautious today. China's property downturn has weakened household wealth expectations and confidence. And when people become uncertain about the value of their biggest asset, they don't necessarily rush out and spend more. They often do the opposite. They hold cash. They delay major purchases. They wait. And that's part of what we've been seeing. Chinese households have continued accumulating deposits even while policymakers have been trying to encourage stronger consumer spending. Think about how strange that is. The government wants consumers to spend. Businesses want consumers to spend. The economy needs consumers to spend. And millions of households are essentially saying, maybe later. Why? Because the psychology of uncertainty is incredibly powerful. The most important word, tomorrow. Here's something most personal finance advice completely misses. People don't spend money based on only what they have today. They spend based on what they believe tomorrow will look like. If tomorrow looks safe, you spend. If tomorrow looks unsafe, you save. And China has spent decades giving households reasons to think about tomorrow. Retirement, education, housing, family obligations, job uncertainty, an aging population. All of these pressures point in the same direction. Save more today. And that's why the Chinese saving story isn't really about some secret budgeting trick. It's about incentives. Your environment teaches you what money is for. In America, money is often presented as a tool for consumption. Earn more, buy better, upgrade, enjoy. In a high-saving environment, money can feel more like protection. Earn, keep, prepare, build. And that difference can completely change your behavior without you even realizing it. The saving trick that doesn't require willpower.
And it has nothing to do with China specifically. It's called paying yourself first. Here's what most people do. They get $5,000. They pay rent. They pay the car. They buy groceries. They eat out. They subscribe to Netflix. They upgrade the phone. They buy something they saw on Instagram. And then at the end of the month, they look at their account. $83 left. And they call that saving. That's not saving. That's whatever survived. Now reverse the order. You receive $5,000. Before you spend it, $750 disappears automatically into investments and savings. Now you have $4,250. You don't spend $5,000 and magically learn how to live on $4,250. You simply start living like $4,250 was your income. And here's the crazy part. Your lifestyle adapts. Because humans are incredibly good at adjusting to whatever becomes normal. Give someone a $5,000 paycheck, and they'll find a way to spend it. Give them a $4,250 paycheck, and eventually, they'll find a way to live on that too. That's why automation is so powerful. You're not trying to become a financial monk every morning. You're removing the decision.
This is where Americans get tricked.
Now let's talk about debt, because this is where saving gets destroyed before it even starts. Imagine you're shopping for a car. The salesperson doesn't say, "Would you like to spend $60,000? They say, "Would you like a payment of $699? Suddenly, the $60,000 disappears. Your brain doesn't see $60,000 anymore. It sees $699, and that's completely different psychological experience. The same thing happens with phones, furniture, vacations, buy now, pay later purchases, credit cards. Everything becomes a monthly payment, and once the big number disappears, the purchase feels smaller. But the debt doesn't disappear. It follows you into the future. And that future paycheck is already partially spent. That's the exact opposite of saving. Saving says, I will sacrifice some of today's consumption so future me has more options. Debt says, I will consume today and let future me pay for it. One moves money forward, the other pulls money backward. And then there's the car. Let's make this painfully simple. Suppose you have a $700 monthly car payment. You don't think about it anymore. It comes out automatically. You barely notice it. But imagine instead you invested that $700 every month for 30 years. At an illustrative 8% annual return compounded monthly, that $700 could grow to approximately $1.04 million. $1 million. Not because you found the next Nvidia, not because you timed the market, not because Warren Buffett called you personally, because you kept $700 month after month for 30 years. That's opportunity cost. And once you understand opportunity cost, every purchase becomes a different question. The question isn't, can I afford the payment? It's, what else could this money become? That is a much more dangerous question, because now the $700 payment isn't just a car, it's potentially $1 million future you're giving up. But don't turn this into misery. Now, before you hear all this and decide you're going to stop enjoying your life, that's not the lesson. You don't need to become obsessed with saving. You don't need to eat rice every day. You don't need to refuse every vacation. And you certainly don't need to save 35% just because someone else does. Because extreme financial restriction can backfire. If your plan makes you miserable, you'll eventually abandon it. The real lesson is much simpler. Spend deliberately. Save automatically. And stop confusing expensive with valuable. A $1,500 laptop you use for work every day for 5 years might be an incredible purchase. A $1,500 designer jacket you wear twice might be terrible. Price doesn't tell you value. Use does. And that's something the high-saving mindset gets right. Before buying something, ask, how much value am I actually getting from this? Not, can I make the payment? The psychology of delayed gratification. There's another reason this matters. Your brain wants rewards now. It doesn't get excited about $500 sitting in an investment account. It gets excited about the vacation, the new phone, the restaurant, the car. That's why saving feels boring. The reward is invisible, but that's exactly why you have to make the future tangible. Take $500. You could spend it this weekend, or you could invest it. At an illustrative 8% annual return compounded monthly, that single $500 contribution could grow to roughly $5,000 over 30 years. That's about a tenfold difference, and suddenly you're not choosing between $500 today and potentially $5,000 later. That's delayed gratification. You're teaching your brain to see the future version of the money. And once you start seeing money that way, spending becomes harder. Not because you hate spending, because you can finally see what you're giving up. The family effect. And this is another part of Chinese saving culture that is easy to underestimate. Money isn't always treated as an individual project. It's often connected to the family, parents, children, grandparents, education, housing, retirement. That changes the emotional equation. If you're saving only for yourself, spending $2,000 on something you want can feel harmless. But if you're thinking, this money could help my parents later, or this could pay for my child's education, or this could give my family 6 months of security, the money suddenly has a job, and people protect money when it has a job. That's why one of the most powerful things you can do isn't simply create a budget, it's create a reason. Don't say, I need to save $20,000. Say, I'm building 6 months of freedom. Don't say, I need to invest $750 every month. Say, I'm buying future options. The number stays the same, the psychology changes completely. So what should you actually copy? Not everything. You don't need to copy another country's entire financial system, and you shouldn't. But there are a few ideas worth stealing. First, save before you spend. Make the transfer automatic. Second, treat emergency savings as protection, not dead money. Third, separate needs from wants. Fourth, think about the future cost of today's purchases. That $700 car payment isn't just $700. It's $700 plus everything that money could have become. Fifth, don't let your lifestyle automatically rise with your income. If your salary increases by $500, don't immediately create $500 of new expenses. Let at least part of that raise become future wealth. And finally, give your money a purpose, because saving without a reason is miserable. Saving for freedom feels completely different. The $5,000 question. So let's go back to that $5,000 paycheck. You make the same amount next month, and the month after that, and the month after that. You have two choices. You can let the entire paycheck become today's lifestyle, or you can take a piece of it and send it somewhere your future self can use it. Maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 10%, maybe eventually it's 20%. You don't have to become a 35% saver tomorrow, but here's what you absolutely cannot afford to do. Stay at 3% forever and assume everything will somehow work itself out. Because 3% doesn't feel dangerous. That's the problem. $150 doesn't look life-changing, but $150 every month for 30 years can become roughly $224,000 at an illustrative 8% annual return compounded monthly, and $750 a month, roughly $1.12 million. Same person, same salary, same 30 years, different savings rate. That's not a motivational quote. That's mathematics, and mathematics doesn't care how badly you want your future to work out. The real secret. So maybe the biggest lesson from Chinese saving culture isn't that Chinese families are somehow naturally better with money. That's too simple. The real lesson is that people save more when their environment, incentives, family expectations, and psychology make saving feel necessary. And here's the uncomfortable part. You don't need those same pressures. You can create your own. You can decide that your future deserves a paycheck too. You can decide that every raise doesn't have to become a nicer lifestyle. You can decide that a $700 payment isn't just a payment. It's a choice between something you can enjoy today and something that could change your life decades from now. Because financial freedom doesn't usually arrive in one giant moment. It gets built in tiny decisions that feel completely insignificant at the time. The extra $100 you didn't spend, the car you didn't upgrade, the raise you didn't immediately consume, the investment you automated before you could touch the money. Nobody celebrates those decisions. Nobody sees them. But 30 years later, they're the difference between needing your next paycheck and not needing one. And maybe that's the most important thing China can teach you about money. The goal isn't to save because spending is bad. The goal is to save enough that your future isn't dependent on your next paycheck. So let me ask you one question. If you suddenly got an extra $1,000 every month, would you let your lifestyle consume it? Or would you make sure a piece of it belonged to the person you're going to become? Because that person is coming, and they're going to inherit every financial decision you're making today.